If you're a big Shark Tank fan, you've probably heard of Tom and Chee. Tom and Chee is one of the most surprising stories from Shark Tank history. There's been so many updates on the business about how successful they were, how much money they were making, and how many locations they had. But when you really dig into their history, you learn most of the company's franchisees ended up failing. The two original owners, who were initially successful, had to sell the company. They even lost their homes, which is pretty sad, considering how nice the guys were. And in this video, I'm going to dig into why that happened and what we can learn from it. So a little bit of background about Tom and Chee. Tom and Chee was founded by Corey Ward and Drew Quackenbush. They opened a restaurant in Ohio that sold grilled cheese and tomato soup. They created a lot of unique grilled cheese sandwiches like the Hippie Chee or the Flying Pig. They even had their famous grilled cheese donut, which sounds weird at first, but so many people have fallen in love with it. The first restaurant was very successful in Ohio, and eventually a customer who was visiting their store wanted to buy a franchise. Now all of a sudden, Tom and Chee had a location in Kentucky through this franchisee. After this experience, the owners think to themselves, we have to get this to everyone in the world, so they apply to be on Shark Tank. And sure enough, they get on to the show in season 4. So now they come on Shark Tank with the hope of raising money from the sharks to expand their business through franchising. On the show, they got a deal with both Barbara and Mark for $600,000 for 30% of the company. But after the show, when due diligence happened, Mark decided not to invest because he didn't think franchising was a good idea. And Barbara only bought a 1% stake in the company rather than the 15% she would have gotten from the deal on the show. So she probably only invested a couple $1,000s, not nearly enough to help them with the expansion. Both Mark and Barb saw some issues with the brand during their due diligence. But I guess Barbara still wanted a small piece of the pie in case it did blow up so she could say she was a part of the success. It turns out though Mark was right that franchising wasn't the correct route to go. After the show, they got requests from thousands of people wanting to open franchises, and they didn't know what to do. This is called the Shark Tank effect, where after your episode airs, because millions of people just saw the episode, everyone is now interested in your company. In an interview Corey had with Barbara, he said before the show, they didn't plan to expand rapidly. They actually had a plan on how to expand slower and more focused. But after they got all these franchise requests, they thought to themselves, what do I do? What is the right plan for my business? What is right for me and my family? That's one of the biggest challenges small businesses make, is deciding how to expand. They eventually decided that all these franchise requests were an opportunity they couldn't say no to, and changed their expansion plans. They were now going to expand rapidly all over the country. From 2014 to 2016, they started opening locations everywhere. They were popping up in so many different states, and it seemed like they would be a household name in the next 10 years. There were so many articles out there about how successful they were and why they were amazing. It was even called one of Barbara's most successful Shark Tank companies. Now here come the problems. One of the biggest problems with having all these locations is that they were not planned out well. The original Tom and Chee was relatively small, as you can see on the left. And it was successful not just because of its food, but because it wasn't that big, so the rent they were paying probably wasn't that high. And it felt more like a family-owned, local restaurant that people associated with Cincinnati. But because of the Shark Tank effect and all the attention they were getting, they thought they needed bigger locations. So most of the new ones that opened up were 3 or 4 times bigger than the original one, as you can see on the picture to the right. And some even had fancy things like electronic doors. But Tom and Chee never had proved a bigger restaurant could generate more sales. And this is something a lot of the owners who bought a franchisee from them probably should have considered. The main selling point Tom and Chee had was being on Shark Tank, and this is why people would visit the restaurant originally. So they would get a ton of customers in the first couple weeks, and the franchisees thought they made a good decision, as you can see on the left. But after visiting the restaurant once and getting to experience it, most customers didn't find it as a restaurant they wanted to frequent often. A lot of the reviews state that the reason for this is because of how easily you can make the items they sell at home, and the prices were pretty high compared to the portion sizes you got. And we see to the picture on the right, this is what most Tom and Cheese looked like after the initial excitement wore off. A big restaurant with hardly anyone in it that now is having to pay tons of money in rent, lighting, etc., without the sales to back it up. Another big concern was their menu was confusing. Many people would walk into the store, see a very large menu, and be confused on how to read it and what to buy. For example, they had a section on there called Crunchy Grilled Cheese. If I'm going into a restaurant for the first time, I'm not too sure what crunchy grilled cheese is, and with this and dozens of other options staring at me, how do I know which one to pick? And a grilled cheese donut may be amazing when you taste it, but not when you first hear it, so it wouldn't come across as something the average person wanted to buy. So Tom and Chee wasn't a restaurant that made you want to visit regularly, which made generating sales very challenging for franchisees. The original owners tried to fix this by changing the menu a couple times, but I honestly think they just made it more confusing. The picture on the left shows their menu when they started expanding, and the picture on the right shows their menu changing after a location started closing. I don't think the menu change helped solve the issue of making a less confusing menu. In fact, adding things like number of calories, unless it was required by the state, would only scare people off in my view. One of the benefits of buying a franchise is you don't have to build out the brand because corporate normally helps you do that. But with the Tom and Chee franchise, if you opened a location, and that was the first one ever opened in that state or city, unless the potential customer has seen Shark Tank, anyone driving past the restaurant probably hadn't heard of Tom and Chee. So this meant it was up to each individual franchise owner to market the brand in their town, and it appears none of them were prepared to do that or knew how to do it. So even though they opened over 50 locations, they didn't know how to market it properly. And marketing it properly was also a challenge, because they never really understood who their target market was, with all these changes in different restaurant sizes. Were they a big, fancy restaurant like the picture on the left? Or were they a small, family-owned restaurant with a local feeling to it like the picture on the right? Even as restaurants started to close down and there were back-end problems, it wasn't still too well known, and they continued to sell new franchises, even though some of their earlier ones were closing. I would say on average, a Tom and Chee franchise only stayed in business around 2.5 years. In their third Shark Tank update, Barbara still tried to call it a successful Shark Tank company, even though locations were closing. But you can tell from the pictures on this slide that Corey originally thought he had an amazing idea and was loving his job, whereas 3 years after Shark Tank, he was questioning so many of the decisions he and the company had made. Tom and Chee had borrowed money to fuel this growth, but couldn't pay it back. The lender then seized their assets, and this is when Gold Star, another restaurant company from Ohio, stepped in to buy Tom and Chee. So because of this, it doesn't sound like True and Corey made any money off the sale. In fact, Barbara mentions in a future Shark Tank episode that both of them lost their homes. Gold Star is trying to make a few attempts at bringing the brand back since their acquisition in 2017. On their website, they still focus a lot on franchising, but it doesn't appear many new franchises have opened since their purchase. I think it's because all of these other franchisees closing makes it hard for anyone to believe this would be a smart business decision. As of today, they only have 7 locations in the US. This is very small, as Tom and Chee has closed over 40 locations. So there are a lot of different lessons different people can take away from this. If you're a business owner, make sure you're smart with your expansion plans. That doesn't mean you can't open multiple restaurants, but you want to make sure you have the right resources, you do it in the correct time, that you do it with the correct people. For potential buyers of a franchise, don't always buy into that hype. It may be better to wait until the excitement wears off, see how some other stores are performing, and seeing if this is actually a good financial decision. For people going on to Shark Tank, be aware of the Shark Tank effect. A lot of businesses that go on to Shark Tank in the earlier seasons weren't aware of this. So when they got tons of attention after the show, they thought it would last forever, but it doesn't. Luckily, a lot of future Shark Tank people know about this and can plan for it accordingly. And for everyone, remembering that bigger isn't always better. Maybe just having a local restaurant in your town that's super successful is good enough for your life and for your family. You don't have to try to make it into the next McDonald's or Burger King.